Hi, I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford. I am a chiropractor since about 1979. I am a certified functional medicine practitioner more recently over the last several years. Excuse me. This is
Dr. Randall Gates. I'm a board certified chiropractic neurologist as well as being a chiropractor.
And those are two separate disciplines which we have melded together in an effort to put together what we feel is a new paradigm for chronic pain, chronic disease. We are today kind of going back to our roots because we started our practice by delving into fibromyalgia. And at that point in time, I used to start my talks off by saying fibromyalgia is a bad name for what people are suffering from, because it means that there's pain in the muscle fibers. And then I used to go on to talk about how it didn't really apply to the parts of the physiology that created fibromyalgia, because fibromyalgia means pain in my muscle fibers, but yet we're going to talk about the things that affect it: stress, thyroid, a bunch of different things. Turns out that it's not even pain in your muscle fibers. It turns out that fibromyalgia is actually a problem in the nerves and not your muscles. So we thought today we would kind of go back to our roots, talk about fibromyalgia. We run a chronic pain practice in which we see a myriad of neurological and non-neurological problems, but fibromyalgia and peripheral neuropathy, which you're going to find out can be part of your fibromyalgia presentation frequently, still are, I think, maybe the two largest parts. We have the most fibromyalgia patients and peripheral neuropathy patients in our practice as a percentage of what we do. So fibromyalgia, let me just say I have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia by him, by Dr. Gates. But I got it after pneumonia, got it after a trigger, and that just lack of understanding and other reasons led me to look into a program that was promoting the fact that they could help me to learn how to treat fibromyalgia. And at the time I was interested in both, learning how to treat it and maybe finding out a few of the things that were starting to bother me. But since then, there has been quite a bit of data that has come out. We've come a little way from telling people it's in your head. We're getting more doctors that are diagnosing it, not with the particularly good parameters, just still kind of a diagnosis of, well, I don't know what you got, so it must be fibromyalgia. But there is still that stigma out there.
There is.
There's still that stigma out there of, okay, fibromyalgia, you don't really have, you got to pull up your bootstraps. We should clear a lot of that up for you today. The first thing that we want to start out with is the history of fibromyalgia and maybe how it went, how it came to be understood that maybe something was going on, and the different poor parameters that were used in the beginning to diagnose it that had almost nothing to do with figuring out how to treat someone. So Dr. Gates has done some background history checking on this, and why don't you share what you have found relative to the history of fibromyalgia?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you alluded to, it's sad that in 2014, still a lot of patients with fibromyalgia go to see a pain management specialist or a rheumatologist or a neurologist. And, they're kind of brushed off. Oh, there's nothing really wrong with you. You have fibromyalgia, so take Lyrica, take Cybella, take Cymbalta, one of those medications. Obviously, some of you have seen fantastic, let me say it this way. Some of you have seen those practitioners and had fantastic experiences. Mm-hmm. Others that we run into have not. Because even in the rheumatology textbooks, they'll acknowledge that many rheumatologists don't like to treat fibromyalgia patients.
And interesting, I am seeing less of a stigma in certain ways when I'm doing the consults, but I am hearing more and more that rheumatologists don't want to treat fibromyalgia. It's kind of an odd juxtaposition, but I am hearing it more frequently.
Yeah. And there's a huge segment of the rheumatology practice that is fibromyalgia, but the rheumatologists like to focus on things like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Sjogren's disease, hardcore autoimmune issues, whereas fibromyalgia, the data is there, and we're going to talk about it so that you fully understand that there are many things that are wrong with you. But it's not as black and white as something like rheumatoid arthritis. And we have to look at the psychosocial aspects of fibromyalgia too, because a lot of fibromyalgia patients are in a lot of pain, and they're depressed. You may be depressed out there. Who wouldn't be depressed if you're in that much pain? And as a result, the interaction between a doctor who has 5 minutes and has to get in and out of the room, and you're trying to tell them everything that's wrong with your gut, to your migraines, to your depression, to what your husband said yesterday, it's lots of times beyond the capacity of that doctor, so they get frustrated. I think that's the most accurate explanation I can give of that. So going to the history, fibromyalgia became diagnosed, or became a diagnostic entity, around 1990. You must know from the physician side that a lot of physicians were actually upset about that. They thought that it was the pharmaceutical industry trying to take advantage of a cohort of the population so they could sell them more medications. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out the physicians were wrong, because basically there ended up being many, many things wrong with fibromyalgia patients. And now that we're almost 25 years beyond 1990, we now know a lot of those things, and we're continuing to learn year by year.
Yes.
And in this broadcast today, we're going to go over some of the newer findings that are out there. We've touched on a few of them, but we really want to cement in this broadcast how fibromyalgia is a neurological problem primarily. There are autoimmune components, there can be food components, there can be stress components to the disorder, and we're going to talk about those. But you need to know it's a neurological issue.
Right. Pains in your nerves. It's the nerves that are causing your pain. Fibromyalgia should be thrown out. The term should be thrown out. It means pain in your muscle fibers, and that is not what's happening. What is happening is something called central sensitization. And we've been aware of that for a long time. In my original lectures on it, I would talk to people about central sensitization, and I would just allude to it simply as the fibromyalgia patient will be much, much more sensitive to pain stimulation than the average person. So the average person, you do that to them, and they're fine. The fibromyalgia patient, when they're in an active response, you do that to them, and they don't want to be touched, or it hurts, or they recoil. And the central sensitization phenomenon is a neurological response.
Absolutely.
And the neurological response is in the brain. The neurological abnormality in fibromyalgia is in the brain.
Yes.
Dr. Gates is the board certified chiropractic neurologist here, so I'm going to defer to him to describe this mechanism of central sensitization because it is key to what you are feeling.
Exactly, because what most in the lay public don't realize, just because it's not discussed, on TV commercials and news broadcasts and things of that nature, is that we have a balance in our nervous system being the brain and the spinal cord, between feeling pain and shutting off pain. Most of you out there don't feel the shirt on your back, or most people don't feel the shirt on their back. You fibro patients may. And the reason for that is that we have these tracks or neurological pathways. This is a better way for you to understand it, in the spinal cord, that actually come from our brain down the spinal cord, that try to shut off pain signals coming into our body. And in fibromyalgia, the balance can be tipped to where those pathways going down the spinal cord don't work as well. And as a result of that, you may have a tendency to start to feel more pain. So early on, in the 2000s, we started seeing this phenomenon of central sensitization in fibromyalgia patients as an explanation as to why someone could have nothing wrong with their muscles, they could have nothing wrong with their joints, they didn't have rheumatoid arthritis, but they could have this pain. And so it's a really big phenomena. And we now know that certain things promote the central sensitization. We know that stress is huge. Many of our fibromyalgia patients, I think it's underrepresented in the literature based on the volumes of fibro patients we've seen, and that a preponderance of them have experienced some form of physical, sexual, verbal, emotional abuse that's pretty severe as a child. Not that all of those aren't severe, but let's just say the verbal abuse was usually pretty severe too, if that was the only thing going on. And that abuse programmed their brain to produce more stress hormones all the time. So rather than say producing this many stress hormones, they're making this many. And the stress hormones flooding throughout the system specifically adrenaline, can bind to the little pain nerves right as they enter the spinal cord. So they send more and more and more and more signals. So as a result of that, then the spinal cord in the brain and those pathways I was talking about that shut off the pain can't work as well. And as a consequence of that, you start to feel more pain. So we'll have other mechanisms too as we go on, but
right.
I think that's central sensitization. And one more thing, sorry. And then we have brain networks in our brain. So then we have, if I touch right here, you have to realize that nerves are sending signals up my arm into my brain over to the left side of my brain. And there's an area of the brain called the parietal lobe that senses things from the body. And the parietal lobe has to make the decision as to whether something is pleasant or painful. Say if I were to stab myself with a knife. Now, in fibromyalgia patients, we also see that with any sensory stimulation, the pain and suffering part of the brain, the emotional part of the brain, activates as well. So they call them brain networks. So the emotional and suffering area of the brain gets hyperactivated. And that can be a problem too with the central sensitization phenomena. So now you're not shutting off signals of pain from the spinal cord, then you're getting all these signals coming up to the brain, and you're perceiving them as all being pain and suffering and horrible. And as a result of that, you don't feel so great.
Right. So you have a filtering mechanism in your brain that in fibromyalgia, you have a filtering mechanism in your brain to help you to stop feeling pain, to allow you to put your shirt on and put your socks on without you going, ah, that hurts, there's a balance there. And in fibromyalgia, that pain mechanism goes down and it doesn't work properly. And so there are a lot of things, as Dr. Gates that indicated, can cause that. When a patient comes into our office, we do a pretty thorough pre-consultation, if you will, and we listen to the history. I pretty much do the intakes. And what I'm listening for is many of the different conditions or abnormalities that might be contributing to that central sensitization. Stress being a big one. Again, as Dr. Gates mentioned, massive amount of sexual abuse out there. It's unbelievable to me. But physical abuse, verbal abuse, or a significant stress that just occurred. You walked into the room, your husband, your brother, your mother, somebody is laying there, and you think they're dead. Or maybe they are dead, or something along those lines. Or you go through a serious car accident. I mean, just all of those things that can turn on that emotional area that Dr. Gates was just referring to can cause that. We look for, I'm always looking for the stress. I'm looking for a thyroid problem, because usually we're going to see a thyroid problem. We're going to get into that a little bit in a few minutes. Usually looking for some sort of a gut problem. There is rarely a fibromyalgia patient who comes into this office that does not have a gut problem. And then in the end, I'm generally looking for some level of the central sensitization. Some people will say, well, I don't really have that yet, but I have everything else. Well, you will. You will eventually. And a lot of people aren't aware that they have it until the neurological exam is done. And Dr. Gates does the neuro exam, and he will be using a little toothpick to stimulate certain areas of the body, and people will be shocked at how sensitive they are to it. So that's kind of the general picture that we're going to be going towards through the rest of this presentation. Now, you have something that you want to discuss relative to abnormal C fiber function. And again, Dr. Gates, I think, was very appropriate in saying, let's really emphasize the neurology in this, because fibromyalgia is a neurological problem. It is not a muscle problem. And all of the other things that I mentioned, the thyroid and gut, are all interfering with your body's ability to help your neurology work properly. So that's the key that I want to bring out here. That maybe you should be going to neurologists instead of going to rheumatologists. But frankly, neither one of them have a good solution for you right now. And you're going to probably understand why over the next few minutes.
Yeah, so just this year, they started talking about microneurography in the literature. Microneurography is a different type of neurological test. It's not commonly done, but they do it in research centers. And the research is incredibly helpful for physicians and clinicians practicing out in the field, because it tells us what's going on with fibro patients. So we have an idea. And basically what they've shown is that the pain nerves in fibromyalgia patients do send abnormal signals. like across the board, the statistics are off the charts, like a huge percentage. I can't remember. I thought it was upwards of 90%, but we have the articles attached. So if anybody wants to check the references, they're there. And it was substantiated this year, and then they came back out and they basically resubstantiated it. And so you need to know that we talked about central sensitization, because that was the understanding, even when I graduated in 2009, that was my entire framework for fibromyalgia. Just in the last year, we've shifted to understand that there can be things wrong with the peripheral nerves. So we have a central nervous system, as I said, brain, spinal cord. Peripheral nerves are nerves that come out of your neck and go into your arms. Things like carpal tunnel syndrome are a peripheral nerve problem. But in all these peripheral nerves, we have pain nerves. We have some nerves that sense vibration. We have some nerves that sense deep touch. We have some nerves that sense light touch. We have other nerves that sense pain. And they've shown that the pain nerves in fibromyalgia patients send abnormal signals back up to the spinal cord. And that's the new area in fibromyalgia. And that's why we're saying that with such certainty, that with all the data out there now, fibromyalgia is a neurological issue. It's not a muscle issue. And even though you feel like your muscles hurt, it's really your nerves. And there are a lot of studies out there talking about, well, fibromyalgia patients have decreased, ability to exercise, and they get tired and they have more pain. Well, that's fine. It still doesn't mean that it's not a neurological problem, because when you're exciting your muscles, you're also sending lots of nerve signals into your spinal cord as well.
Right. And then we can talk about that when Dr. Gates talks about patients who can't exercise and they crash. That's kind of a different animal relative to.
And I was just saying that relative to the literature out there, because somebody on the internet is going to say, "Well, I found this research that talked about exercise," and yes, I read them.
Right. We had a nice experience this week of going to a pretty impressive seminar. And they had folks there talking about fibromyalgia, and the gentleman actually put on a really good talk, which frequently will go and be disappointed. And then there was another lady that was talking about GI problems and pretty much all of the data that these people were using and putting up on the internet. All of the research papers are somewhere on our website attached to some talk that we've done. So Dr. Gates is our research maven here. He's pretty much on it, and I would say we're a little ahead of the curve on that. To bridge over, Dr. Gates started to talk about peripheral nerves. And again, I got into this because I got pneumonia, let it go. Next thing you know, I put on weight, my hair was falling out. But I did remember, usually, and I talked to my wife about this the other day, I remember she remembers how I used to say every single fiber of my body feels like it hurts, and I can't really tell you what's going on. It was confusing. This was before any of this stuff came out, and also my legs started to become numb, and I started to have a little difficulty. And at the time, I had been skiing a lot, and frankly I never shared this with you. I thought it was because I was putting my ski boots on too tight, and so and the data, there was no data out there. The data out there was not very good. But it turns out that what we have seen is a significant portion of patients who have fibromyalgia, the tenderness, and somebody hugs you and you're tender, and so on and so forth, have peripheral neuropathy, numbness, tingling, burning, and the peripheral neuropathy component, I would assume, is probably kind of surprising to a lot of doctors, because their position on peripheral neuropathy is 50% of it's diabetes, the other 50% we don't know what it is.
And nothing can be done for it.
And nothing can be done for it. And we see it all the time in our office with the fibromyalgia patients. So this might be something interesting for you to kind of get acquainted with. Mm-hmm. Did you want to discuss that with some more specificity than that?
Yeah, just because, as you said, a lot of doctors are not aware of this. We weren't aware of it. Well, not to sound egotistical.
Well, we saw it,
we have to be on top of the newest research, because patients are coming to us looking for solutions. We don't use medications. We're trying to use everything natural on the face of the planet with every piece of data we can get our hands on to help you, the fibromyalgia patient, get better. So we saw the article come out in June of 2013. I think it was in the journal Pain. It was later published. That was the early publishing. It was later published in November in that journal, where they came out and said that upwards of half of fibromyalgia patients have small fiber neuropathy. Now, peripheral neuropathy is typically where people get numbness and tingling and burning in the feet, progresses up to the knees, and then can involve the hands. Everybody on the planet knows it's associated with diabetes. However, most people, including a lot of doctors, kind of just throw their hands up when it's not diabetes. Now, in the peripheral neuropathy world, there's this entity called small fiber neuropathy, which is where the nerves that send pain, it's the pain nerves. The small fiber nerves, the ones I was talking about before with the microneurography, they're small fiber nerves. And they can also die and degenerate, creating this condition called small fiber neuropathy. So, Journal of Pain comes out in November last year officially and says half of fibromyalgia patients approximately have small fiber neuropathy. Just a seminal article, because now we're saying, wow, that explains it, because we have seen a ton of fibromyalgia patients who looked like they had small fiber neuropathy based on their examination. And I just kept thinking, wow, well, it must be the prediabetes, or it must be the autoimmune problem. You know, what's the association? Well, since that seminal paper came out, several other studies have come out and have basically substantiated the same findings. And the statistics really range between a third and a half between study to study to study that you look at. But just know a significant percentage of fibro patients have this condition where the pain nerves are dying. And when they die, they send a lot of signals, because it's just like, you know, this is a horrible analogy, but somebody who's drowning, they're frantic. They're doing everything they can to stay above water. Well, same thing with these small fiber nerves. They're sending all the signals they can before they ultimately die. And that can generate a lot of the pain that you as the fibromyalgia patient is experiencing.
Right. And it's really interesting. I don't think this has really reached clinical practice yet.
Not in my observation.
And it's reached our clinical practice. And we did see it quite a bit, but never really, it was one of those things where, oh yeah, they have fibromyalgia, and this patient also has peripheral neuropathy. And oh yeah, like me.
Yeah.
So I'm treating myself for peripheral neuropathy and fibromyalgia, and it's like, okay, you know, two separate things. But this, and I don't think it's really going to change the medical model. And
Maybe just change the medication.
yeah, we go to great lengths to let people know we're not anti-medicine by any stretch of the imagination. We worked with osteopaths, we work with cardiologists and internists and so on and so forth when it's appropriate in these cases. In these cases, many of them do require an integrated approach. I don't know, maybe a quarter of our patients we really need to integrate with one of the allopathic physicians. But in the end, this is not going to change what they do. It's still going to be medication. It's still going to be pain control. It's still going to be pain management. One of the complaints that we've had about some of our presentations is we don't tell people how to get better. Let me just assure you, you can feel good. I feel good. But the reason we can't do that is because one of our taglines is treat the patient, not the diagnosis, and the results speak for themselves. And you cannot treat each patient exactly the same. So I can't. We're giving you the basics of what is fibromyalgia, but then within the framework of each of those basics, there's a number of different components that need to be addressed. For example, we'll move on from the fact that half of patients who have fibromyalgia probably have peripheral neuropathy, and there are solutions for both of those problems. And I already stated, when patients come in here, I'm looking for a thyroid problem. I'm looking for, because people come in here, insurance doesn't cover what we do. They consider it experimental. They consider whatever they can say to not pay for it. They'll say. But the bottom line is that if we're going to treat people, if we're going to accept the case, we're going to accept the case. If they're going to have to pay us, they're going to get better. Okay, and I can say that we pretty consistently are successful with these cases. So when a patient's coming in, I'm looking to see if we have a patient who is in that arena of being able to get better if they're willing to do what we ask them to do. And we're looking for stress. We're looking for that. We're looking for thyroid. We're looking for gut problems, but we're also looking for immune problems. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do agree that we're looking for autoimmune problems. And frankly, I'm to the point where when a fibromyalgia patient comes in the door, I'm listening to hear if they got some sort of massive stress that hit them, some sort of almost like a mini or massive post-traumatic stress syndrome, and if they have an immune problem. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm listening to hear. If I hear that, then I know I know that game is on. I know that for the most part, we're going to be able to help that person. And for those of you who want to know, like, how do you handle that? Well, my God, I mean, within the framework of the immune system, I mean, you have to look at everything. You have to look at the person's stress levels because that screws up their immune system. And you have to learn how to calm that down. You have to look at their endocrine system. You have to look at their food. You have to look at their allergies. You have to look at their gut. You have to look at all that. So for those of you who have written us, you got a little upset that you didn't tell us how to fix it. We can't tell you how to fix it. We can't tell you how to fix it until we examine you, until we find out which parts of the puzzle are you. And then once you find out those parts of the puzzle, then you can address it. But you had some thoughts on
yeah, because we're not, just to finish that point, we're not a pharmaceutical drug commercial. You know, I think people are so used to that.
Right.
You know, the picture of the people running through the meadow, all of a sudden they don't have pain because they took X drug, and that's fine.
Or even an herb. I know when I first started doing thyroid, it was what was becoming obvious to me was the person who was coming in was looking for the next great pill. Right. They were looking for the next pill because the thyroid medication didn't help them. What's the herbal pill? Are you going to give me iodine? Are you going to give me thymus and all this type of stuff? Which, frankly, for most of our patients, isn't the answer for all the iodine folks out there. But yeah, so the immune system is huge. Stress is huge. Yeah. You wanted to, I think it's worthwhile, as you had written down, to discuss the connection between those two, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking stress, I'm looking immune, and I'm looking, can we knock that stress down? Is that possible? Because if it's not possible, we're in trouble.
We are, exactly.
As far as helping that patient.
Exactly.
And we're talking about doing it without drugs.
Yeah. And relative to the immune mechanism, basically, the immune mechanism is so important. Think of when you're sick, and a lot of fibro patients feel worse when they're sick. Not only like they feel worse in terms of having cold symptoms, like I have a little sinus infection right now. I don't know if it's allergies or what. But they also will have a tendency for their fibroid to be worse. The reason why is that the immune inflammation, your immune system is like the military. And so they're going everywhere, trying to get rid of the bacteria or the virus. And in doing that, that creates inflammation, because a lot of the way they kill the bacteria or the virus is through creating inflammation to kill that organism. The problem we're finding with fibromyalgia patients is that that immune inflammation is sustained. Now, it's different from rheumatoid arthritis, it's different from lupus and Sjogren's and most other rheumatological disorders, but it is there. And we talked about a paper, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago on that exact issue. It's one of our fibromyalgia updates. But to keep going, basically, that immune inflammation causes those pain nerves, again, where they attach to the spinal cord, to send more signals. That's why it's so darn significant. And they're also thinking that the immune inflammation may be part of the process behind the small fiber neuropathy in so many of the fibromyalgia patient population or subjects. So that's important. You mentioned thyroid. Article, I think we attached to autoimmune thyroid disease. They're talking about 86% have some form of rheumatological manifestation. Now, by that, that can include things like osteoarthritis and Raynaud's and things of that nature, but they also mentioned fibromyalgia. Journal of Clinical Rheumatology this year, January, they came out and said Hashimoto's is something that's really significant to fibromyalgia patients. Hashimoto's is where the immune system kills the thyroid. That's the name of the disease.
I have that too.
And that's 95% of you hypothyroid patients out there. So if you're taking Synthroid or levothyroxine or one of the other thyroid derivatives and Armour, then know that there's a good probability that your immune system is the cause of that. And if you have fibromyalgia, then know that it has been substantiated that there's a relationship between that immune inflammation to your thyroid and the pain that you're experiencing. So all very, very significant stuff.
Yeah, frankly, it's rare that we see a fibro patient come here who doesn't have Hashimoto's.
Right.
It's rare. If I can't even remember it, but I'm sure it's happened a couple of times.
And we say that based on a criteria we're using too, because there's a lot of discrepancy in the literature as to what normal thyroid immune cell count is.
Well, that's true. There is a lot of discrepancy, but I will say this. Now, I haven't been looking at the labs for a while, okay? But at the end, when Doug Gates has taken over all treatment here, and we've kind of divided this up so that we can get the best response. So we do some pretty heavy interviewing and examining, and so I'm involved in most of that. But and then the examination and history will dictate what labs that we will order. So it's not a carte blanche, okay, everybody gets the same lab because they come in with fibromyalgia, but pretty much everybody gets the full thyroid panel. And I did start to notice at the end that there were some labs that were coming down to So the labs out there will normally say, right, it's still about 0 to 32 for most of the labs.
34, but you know,
34.
LabCorp had a 26
And then there was
the other day.
There was 26.
20.
I've seen 16 before. I saw 16 and I actually saw one or two. I think I saw 1 or 2 10s, which is our range. Our range is like if you're over 10 in your thyroid peroxidase enzyme, as far as we're concerned, you have some manifestation of an immune attack on your thyroid. And now we can even say that. We used to try to use funky language, but there are labs that are now acknowledging that.
Right.
And so, so that's the confusion. A lot of you might have been told you got tested for it and told you were normal and so on and so forth. And that's a whole can of worms in and of itself. But stress mechanisms really screw up your immune system.
Exactly. So stress does a number of things. It breaks
and this
down
is a big thing. That's why I'm coming back to it.
Exactly. Acute stress is a good thing. If you have a line in front of you, you want a stress response because it's going to make your muscles contract harder. It's going to mobilize glucose from your liver so your muscles can pump harder, so your heart's going to pump harder. You know, all those things are really beneficial, and that's why we have a stress response. The problem is that most Americans and people in other societies, you know, we could say maybe, well, I won't go into it. Anyways, a lot of societies, people are under stress, and that stress chronically causes the body to basically break down, and it imbalances the immune system. Number one, it does a host of things from changing hormone profiles to breaking down the gastrointestinal tract in our experience to leading to these chronically elevated adrenaline levels that can cause these nerves that send pain, the small fiber nerves, to send more signals into your spinal cord.
And you know, it's interesting. We've talked
They become stronger. I'm sorry.
We've talked about the stress in society. We've talked about how we're becoming a fear-based society. I was listening to a very controversial radio talk show host the other day, and he said, I know I'm stepping out of line now, and I know I'm going to take a lot of heat for this, but he was talking about how we are being manipulated by the different political parties and how we're being manipulated by the media through just continual fear of everything. Right. You're going to get sick. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. We talked about that prior to this because if you've had some of those horrible things happen to you, the verbal abuse or the physical abuse or the sexual abuse, or you've had some tremendous trauma, and it's in that emotional system that Dr. Gates talked about previously, and you're continually in this environment of fear, it just totally screws up your right brain. Yeah. For those of you who have fibromyalgia, you probably are your right brain's probably not working too well. Probably not too motivated. Well, your left brain's probably not working too well. Yeah, I just said that. He's the brain guy. And you're probably not motivated as well as you should be. And you probably have a hard time getting up and doing things. And there's just a lot of left brain stuff that's not going on very well. And a lot of it has to do with this chronic fear. I don't think we're overemphasizing this because this is something we see every day. The last number that I remember hearing, and this was a while ago, as far as the number of chronic pain patients in this country is 120 million, of which the fibro patient is a pretty good chunk of that. It's certainly not like all of it, but it seems to be expanding, despite the fact that we have more knowledge of what's going on. And I think the reason it's expanding is because the drugs don't really, our model in this country is a drug model, and it doesn't really address almost anything that we're talking about.
Yeah,
not as far as
underlying issues. Exactly. Yeah, it's just trying to do the math. You know, 5% of the population has fibro on average, I think is the statistic I remember. So that's about 20 million. Same thing with peripheral neuropathy. It's about 20 million. That's a lot of what we treat. So, but yeah, the stress is pivotal. And, you know, I am having patients do anti-news diets now because they come in and, I'm kind of stressed, and, then I watch Fox News, and then, I notice my heart rate's going up, and I'm just shaking my head because I've done it too. We get so worried about all these circumstances we have no control over, most of us though. And if you have fibromyalgia patients, just know that, as Dr. Rutherford is saying,
we're inundated with it.
Being inundated with the constant news alerts and the news broadcasts, and this is going on and this is happening. It's not what we're meant to do. Right. It's not what our body is meant to handle.
So the stress is a big problem in fibromyalgia, and we go to great lengths to help the patients to control that stress without drugs for the most part. I would say
Yeah.
I would say 95% of the time.
Exactly.
Or,
Our interventions are non-drug, and then,
Right.
if we need an integrated approach, we
Right.
do that. And,
And there's one more kind of interesting, what may be somewhat controversial, and I don't think it's controversial. It has never been controversial for us, but the aspects of what exacerbates your brain, what exacerbates your system, what exacerbates your immune system, and it is gluten. And it is gluten. And we treat the patient and not the diagnosis. Okay, that is our mantra. I can get 100 people in here with fibromyalgia, and they can all be treated drastically to slightly different. And that slightly might be the difference of one food allergy from one person to the next. That might sabotage their ability to get better and to continue to get better and to maintain getting well. But gluten is, I think, our one constant, probably our only standard recommendation for a patient to eliminate from their diet and stay eliminated forever.
Right, exactly.
Want to discuss that?
I do, and I'm trying to think where to start. So we're at this conference down in Las Vegas, mainly put on by medical doctors, for all you medical doctor fanatics out there. And we're not anti-medicine at all. Most of our colleagues are medical doctors, and we work with other DOs and things of that nature.
But these are MDs who are
kind of shifting to our side.
They're looking to come over to our side.
A lot of the focus of the seminar was on what we do, because they're realizing that what we do works for chronic pain and chronic problems and obesity and gut problems and on and on and on. And so one of the presenters was saying how she takes all of her patients off of gluten because it's a zonulin toxin. And we presented this in one of our gluten talks quite a while ago. And in essence, zonulin is what keeps your intestines like a solid pipe. It keeps the cells of your intestines together. And when it breaks down,
keeps the stuff in your intestines that belongs in your intestines from getting out and going into your bloodstream where it doesn't.
Right. It's just like this glass. Because let's say this glass was made of cells that were tightly bound together. Well, then if zonulin breaks down, then guess what? You get Swiss cheese and stuff starts leaking out. Now, that's a dramatic example. We talked to a lot of patients about this, and they said, well, I talked to my doctor, and he said, well, if there's bacteria in my bloodstream, then you would be dead. And your doctor's absolutely right. That's not what we're saying. We're saying macromolecules, pieces of bacteria can start to leak through that shouldn't be there. The reason why this is bad is because that can trigger the immune system to start attacking those macromolecules. And as a result, that can create some of this inflammation we're talking about. We actually spoke with Dr. Vajdani, one of the world's foremost immunologists relative to the immune system and the gut. And I didn't even tell you this, but they emailed us and they want us to start sending cases.
I saw that.
Okay, you did see that.
I did see that.
So it's very neat. So we're going to be collaborating with Dr. Vajdani on this. But the whole point of this is that a study came out, I think it was November, and they discussed that they looked at 20 fibromyalgia patients. They went in, they did all the testing for celiac disease. Celiac disease is an autoimmune problem.
I have
the
that
immune
too.
system kills the gut when you eat gluten, basically. And there are specific lab tests for it, blood tests, and there are also specific findings on an endoscopy where the gastroenterologist goes in and looks at your small intestine. So they did all these tests on fibromyalgia patients, and basically they saw that they didn't have celiac disease, but all of them had a lot of inflammation in their intestines, and they had a lot of immune cells in their intestines. So they took them all off gluten, and some responded quickly, some responded slowly, but after 6 to 8 months, all of them were feeling better. Right. All of them, not just 15, not just an aberration of, like 10. All of them felt better. So I was just looking at the literature last night, and so now I'm seeing these other studies being proposed now to do these huge randomized controlled trials to examine this. But know that gluten could be significant. What the authors talked about is that gluten is possibly, in today's day and age, a difficult molecule to break down, and maybe creating inflammation in the intestines, and that inflammation may be part of the reason why you have a neurological problem called fibromyalgia.
Right. And so this is fibromyalgia. And I don't say this to say, I mean, you're sitting there thinking, man, what is this guy doing here? Like, he's got fibro and peripheral myopathy. That's why I'm here. And Hashimoto's and celiac and the whole thing. And for those of you who want to know how to treat it, it's complex. It's complex. Everything is interrelated, but you have to figure out, it has to be figured out how to knock down your stress mechanism. And that is not an easy thing to do, but it is doable, and we're able to do it here every day. you have to figure out if there are immune responses there, and that immune response is going to preclude us having to figure out how to fix that person's gut, of which it is a rare person who comes in here without a gut problem who has fibromyalgia. And then you have the stress. Oh, and then the thyroid. Virtually everyone has thyroid. That alone can take a number of different forms and how to address that for the patient. And then you have the immune response. So you have a lot of different players going on, all that can have multiple different approaches. So you have to determine which of those players are in play for that particular patient, and then which of the couple of things. I mean, there's so much more to what we talked about, but which of what's affecting the immune system? What's affecting the thyroid? Is it the immune system affecting the thyroid? Do you have a bad thyroid? Are you not getting your thyroid hormones right? Are you taking drugs that's killing them? Do you have a viral infection that's attacking your thyroid? All of these things have to be understood and can be in a very organized way. And the whole gluten trip has been a long journey. But I can tell you, I had to pay. We have a new staff member here. I was talking to her the other night. She got Crohn's disease. She's been tested 4 times for gluten sensitivity, and she's been told she doesn't have it. But if she eats bread or pasta or has a beer with her chicken wings, which she's going to stop doing very shortly here, she's sick, and she knows it. And she's thin. She looks like this, and she said, and my stomach bloats out like that. End of story. She's got a gluten problem. So these are the things that you're facing. And I want to go back to the fact that all of these entities negatively affect your nervous system's ability to function, and that your brain has lost its ability to filter this pain out. And so you have a pretty complex group of conditions that need to be addressed and can be addressed. It can be a little tedious. It can take a little bit of time. But I'm in pretty good shape. I mean, I have my days where I'm a little tired. I rarely have days where I get any pain anymore. And if I do, it's so mild, I don't have to actually think about it. Think, is that like me? Is that the fibro thing going on? Or am I getting like a virus, or am I getting a cold or something like that? I mean, it's that small. So it can be done. And it can be done for most fibro patients. And so if nothing else, I hope that you understand it's not a muscle problem. It is a neurological problem. You better know somebody who knows neurology. I mean, we'd love to be your fibro guys, your fibro experts, because we get this. We know what we're doing in this, and we feel pretty confident in what we're doing, and we feel pretty confident with what we're sharing with you. So if you have any questions, unless you have something to wrap up, if you have any questions relative to anything that we talked about, any of the studies, Dr. Gates has reviewed them all, that he has attached pertinent studies. Clinically, you have some confusions, you have some questions on that, you can email us at powerhealthtalk.com, or you can look us up on our Facebook, our Facebook site, and we'll do our best to get back to you in some reasonable amount of time. If you're interested in data on how we work with these things, man, we have 150 hours online. If you want to look up the gut, if you want to look up fibromyalgia, we have other talks on it. If you want to look up peripheral neuropathy, it's on there. If you want to see what our history looks like, we have a 17-page history that's pretty pertinent to the fibro and peripheral neuropathy patient. That's available. Whatever you need, we'd love to be here to help you. So I hope that helps. And I hope you review some of the things that I just got done mentioning. And until next time, I think that probably does it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you for watching.